The sky tore like paper. A wound in reality spat out a figure whose boots had never known peace. He stepped down into a world not carved by gods or kings, but ripped by endless war, a planet saturated with the warp's sickly breath. Armor plates sighed, and the air tasted of old prayers and newer screams, but a predator with an oath to break. This was not hell as he had known it. This was something older. The warp watched, furious, hungry. The Slayer readied himself. The hunt had a new horizon. From the crimson fog, claws and teeth and wrong geometry surged. Daemons smelled a living thing that refused to be fear. The Slayer moved with practiced, brutal economy. Shoulder, step, blast. His bolter equivalent roared once. A daemon's head exploded into a constellation of screaming motes. The creatures recoiled as if struck by thunder. He didn't speak. He made choices in violence. Around him, the warp's edges shrieked as thought forms bled into matter. When a bloodletter leapt, the Slayer's blade met it, and time folded in on the cut. For each daemon undone, the air grew thinner. The Immaterium whispered rumors it had never known, a being that erased madness with will. Far above, the aspect of slaughter stirred. Khorne, the blood god, felt an itch like a blade against a ribcage. Worshipless slaughter intrigued him. He sent avatars of wrath, rivers of red, skull palaces made of screaming bronze. They collided with the Slayer's movement and were carved away like weeds. Each kill sang. Not prayer, not servitude, but answer. Khorne's joy was not sated by offerings. He wanted conquest, conflict, test. The Slayer failed the expected ritual of fear. Instead, he answered with a type of violence that refused to be contained. The god of blood turned his gaze from worship to curiosity. A new pattern was forming on the altar of war. Spaceborne instruments registered disturbances the Inquisition had named blasphemies. Vessels rerouted, convoys diverted. A strike cruiser carrying brothers in silver armor cut the void to this world. The Grey Knights, humanity's psychic daemon killers, descended with sanctified purpose. Their psi wards screamed at an anomaly within the field, an entity that burned without flame, a focal point that repelled possession. They expected a daemon host. They found carnage and a single silhouette breathing under a sky of dying light. The knights raised their halberds and tectonic bolters. Protocols enacted. Judgment must be swift. The unknown stood silent, not defiant in word, but defiant in effect. The Grey Knights struck as angels of cold law, psychic bolts carved red in the air. The Slayer met assault like stone meets wave, unyielding, disruptive, inexorable. Chains, blades, and ritual fire failed to bind the motion of his assault. He shattered Ceramite with bone and will. The Notes fought with honor and purpose. He fought with memory and a hunger older than doctrine. For a heartbeat, contact was a conversation in violence. Then, one knight chanted the Emperor's name, and the Slayer's motion faltered. A memory like a scar, a human echo, flickered beneath his helmet. For the first time since he had been brought here, the Slayer considered more than the next kill. The battlefield held its breath. Beyond the veil, a red eye opened. Magnus the Red, Primarch of thought and sorcery, observed a pattern that did not fit prophecy. A creature defying the warp's natural appetite, neither vessel nor worshipper. An anomaly, he whispered, and the Immaterium answered with static. The 1,000 suns gathered their insight, seeking the why behind such will. Magnus sought parle with the stranger, to study, to dominate, perhaps to bend. The warp, usually a chorus of voices, hummed a new note, a note of blunt force and uncompromised will. The Primarch decided to descend. Knowledge would come first. Knowledge would justify power. Magnus materialized in a bloom of glyphic thunder. He looked upon the figure and extended his inquiry in the language of thought. The Slayer received that probing like a blow. Images crashed, battlefields, hellish engines, a life narrated by killing. Magnus sought patterns, meaning, and worship. The Slayer offered none. He fired, a projectile that ruptured psychic wards, and for a sliver of time, the Primarch experienced raw, physical violence in a way the warp had denied. Intrigued instead of enraged, Magnus amplified his search. He peeled back memory layers, scraped at the man's past. There was a hollow, yes, but also iron. Purpose purified into momentum. Such clarity was foreign and fatal to the Immaterium's habits. What followed was a duel of cosmos, primordial will against sculpted intellect will. Magnus layered illusions and tidal mindstorms. The Slayer responded with blunt, repetitive rupture. Each psychic construct the Primarch raised became a target for simple, brutal logic. Interrupt, strike, continue. The warp convulsed, as if being lectured in a language it could not parse. The Slayer's swings altered topology, ripped seams, and revealed trapped echoes. For every act of creation the warp produced, the Slayer of Corn, bloodthirst incarnate, perceived a problem. Worship drives power, but the Slayer's power was not worship-fueled. It was argument-fueled, an argument that cut. The blood god hurled avatars formed from slaughter itself. The Slayer met them with muscle and hated efficiency. His existence skewed the economy of offering and hunger. When a god finds his terms undermined, he grows testy. Khorne's avatars scrambled the battlefield into a cathedral of red light. The Slayer carved through altars as if they were driftwood. His blade did not sing to the god. It told him he was unnecessary. The Grey Knights observed that where their sacred rites petered out, the Slayer's actions freed prisoners of the warp. incorporeal souls that had been reshaped into screws. Some were men, some were not. The librarian recorded aberrant data, the Slayer cleansed without a rite. Ground commanders faltered at doctrine. Recruit him to the Emperor's cause, or end him for unknown blasphemy. In a practical council, guns and faith balanced. In the field, the Slayer answered, only carnage. Commanders decided reluctantly, keep distance, observe, and if necessary, contain. War calendar pages turned. The answer would not be tidy. Magnus intensified. He wrapped memories in velvet wire, presented visions of cosmic order and catastrophic solitude. He tried to entice the Slayer with knowledge of why the warp devours and why destiny weaves itself into chains. The Slayer felt each seduction as heat, but not as hunger. He moved through illusions and left them hollow, their promises exposed as scaffolds. Rage, however, was not numbness. It carried judgment. The Slayer judged the warp as a cancer on motion and executed excision without mercy. Magnus's curiosity became frustration. He had expected souls or a crown. He found a hammer when Magnus launched a psychic cyclone designed to rewrite identity. The warp storm sought to rearrange the Slayer's essence into a vessel. For a moment, it seemed the man would break. Flesh tore, the armor smoked. Yet instead of yielding, the Slayer sang one action. He broke his own wound open with weapon and will, redirecting the psychic torrent back through the seam of reality. The storm licked itself and found none to sustain. The effect rippled. Demon constructs collapsed into memory ashes. The Primarch tasted a sensation akin to vertigo. The Imperium had been wounded by bluntness. There is a kind of violence that cleanses by removing connection rather than burning. The Slayer embodied that motion. Sever, remove, continue. As the warp recoiled in regions, trapped souls thinned, and some broke free, not to safety, but to silence. And silence is sometimes salvation within the Materium. Magnus witnessed constructs collapse, and for the first time, considered that not all power must be built on devotion or fear. What had arrived was an anti-liturgy, a practice of unmaking. For the sorcerer god, this presented a dangerous curiosity, a technique that could unravel cults as neatly as it cut foes. Word of the anomaly spread like a contagion through cult networks and fortified strongholds. Heretical preachers lost congregants whose minds steadied into simple survival. Battles that would have fed chaos instead met a strange predator who reduced them to tactical problems. The Imperium exploited the disruption, staging precision raids where cults were weakest. Meanwhile, chaos scoured the Immaterium for anything that might replicate this resistance. Great champions of the warp were sent. They fell into sequences of frustration. The galaxy's rhythms altered. For short hours, the business of endless war was interrupted. No crucible is free. The Slayer's body and will are not infinite. Each engagement in the warp took a toll unseen in his previous hunts. The Imperium bit at memory, and the man who had been sustained by rage alone now fought to keep identity between strikes. He found old faces in visions, ghosts of home he had once been severed from. The Grey Knights noted cracks in his behavior, pauses where focus flickered. Command judged that this anomaly could be an asset if contained, or an apocalypse if used freely. The question turned operational. How do you weaponize someone who will refuse to be owned? Magnus returned, not to bargain, but to end experiment. He manifested a cathedral of thought around them and set the rules to absolute. Surrender to pattern or be dissolved. The Slayer, exhausted and ragged, faced such infinity. There came a small, almost human whisper from the man. He raised his weapon and ran the length of the cathedral, cutting glyphs, smashing totems, rupturing idea structures like they were brittle bones. The act was not sophisticated. It was kinetic faithlessness. Destroy the altar and the prayer has nowhere to rest. Magnus's constructs split like glass against relentless impact. The Primarch felt the world recalibrate. Period. After the final stroke, the warp stuttered. The roar that had belonged to a million voices became a single, stunned chord. For a time, the Imperium offered no reply. Demonic silhouettes froze mid-gesture and faded. Cultists found their fervor dampened. The battlefield was not peaceful. It was hollowed. The Grey Knights looked upon the Slayer with a complicated mix of fear and gratitude. Magnus withdrew to the eye, his curiosity transformed into a cautious respect wrapped in fury. He had not been defeated by worship, but by an agent who erased the rules. When word finally spread beyond the sector, official logs documented anomalies and redacted names. Some whispered that a man became a weapon. Others, that a wound in the warp had been stitched by violence. The Imperium filed a single cryptic note. Non-compliant asset encountered. Cults murmured a new heresy. A story of a hunter who would not serve and would not be made into a god. Centuries in warp time are short, but stories travel. Somewhere, among ritual fires and command decks, the name passed into myth. A title without deity. A slur the